so much for coming tonight. Many of you were here last night for the lecture by Tim McKenna about the Chrysler Building, and so many of you are coming back to hear some of the wonderful programming that we have set up celebrating the 250th anniversary of our great country. The history, the culture, and the patriotism of so many people that started the revolution here in Massachusetts that ended up being where we live today. And aren't we fortunate? So tonight, we are going to hear from a woman by the name of Julie Bartlett Nelson. She is the head of the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Library and Museum at Forbes Library in Northampton. She is the head of that library and the museum. She has a BA in American Studies and an MSLIS in Archives Management and MA in History. Julie has been at the Coolidge Museum for 22 years and has over 30 years experience working in archives, museums, and public and academic libraries. When we were developing some of the programming for the center, certainly for the celebration of the 250th, we had to recognize, where did the revolution start? Here in Massachusetts, the seat of the revolution. Now Virginia will claim that they're the southern seat, but let's face it, the northern seat was far more impactful here in Massachusetts. We had 4 or 5 presidents from Massachusetts, one of them, Calvin Coolidge, who served from 1923 to 1929. So we are in the centennial of his presidency in our great country. So I'm going to turn it over now to Julie, who I'm sure will have far more information about Calvin Coolidge than I have. Thank you very much for coming, Julie.
Thank you, Mary Beth, and thank you all for coming out tonight. Can you all hear me okay?
No, not on.
There we go. Now we're on. Well, thank you for coming out tonight to learn about Calvin Coolidge. We are in the centennial of the Coolidge administration. So we have been celebrating that for 1923 to 1929 with lots of different programming. If you look at the Forbes Library YouTube channel, you'll find lots of 100th anniversary programs that we've been doing. We have one coming up in April on the centennial of the 1926 Tax Act, and we have one coming up in May about a narcotics farm bill and therapeutic farming. So you can look for those. They're all recorded. They're all live streamed as well. So I think tonight we're going to talk about Coolidge and its relevance to today. So when we think of the 250th anniversary year we're in, Coolidge's centennial, and then Coolidge is presiding president at the 150th in 1926. And so we've done a lot of research around what the 150th looked like as well. So how many people have actually been to Forbes Library in Northampton? The upper end of the valley here? Okay, a few of you. So this is the building, and the Coolidge Museum is up on the 2nd floor, left-hand side. And Forbes opened in 1894. It's named for Charles Forbes. He was a lawyer and a judge and left his estate to build a new public library. And this was called the Castle on the Hill when it was first built. It's about 40,000 square feet, and Coolidge space occupies about 2,500 square feet. So pretty small when you think of modern presidential libraries. So it's everyone after him that's part of the National Archive system. He is the last private presidential collection and the only one in a public library. So it makes us very unique. So no federal money for him, no state money. He has a small little endowment and the public library. So how things came to be in the public library for Coolidge as well. He moved to town in 1895 after graduating from Amherst College, and he decides to study law. And one of his mentors was also a Forbes Library trustee, and knew of Mr. Forbes' personal law book collection, which had been left there. And so young Calvin is studying from Charles Forbes' personal book collection, which was known as the best law library in all of New England, put here in the public library. It was circulating, so he could take all these books home and study from as well. So he credits that his career and his passing of the bar exam could not have happened without his public library. So a little more than some childhood nostalgia, that we essentially were his law school. So Calvin Coolidge is born 1872 on the 4th of July in Plymouth Notch, Vermont, which has anybody ever been up there? Ooh, a few of you. It's absolutely gorgeous site. It's near Ludlow and Woodstock, and you're about 10 minutes from Okemo Ski Resort. It's open in the middle of May till the middle of October, and fall foliage there is amazing. If you ever time it that, they peak about 10 days ahead of us here. So, and it's an amazing spot up there. So a tiny little farm village of about 400 people, hasn't grown much at all. And but the state of Vermont owns his father's farm, his grandparents' farm, a cheese factory his father and son had once run, and church, schoolhouse. So there's about 15 buildings that are open there as well. So I just have to give a shout out to them. So if you're looking for a road trip this summer. And at Forbes, we actually have a pass to get in there for free. And anybody with a C.W. Myers library card can stop and pick that up. So you can also get free admission. So these photos, we have young Calvin age 2 and age 7. And so these childhood photos he had gifted to the Forbes collection later. And then this is that Plymouth Notch farmhouse of his father's. So a modest little farmhouse with 3 attached barns as well. And they have this restored to 1923 when he took the oath of office from his father following Harding's death in this house. They actually are doing quite a bit of renovations on it right now. So some you can't see, like a new sprinkler system and things, but it will be open by May. So these we have, how did Calvin get to Northampton? From the little farm village, his father was a notary public. He also ran a general store. He also was a dairy farmer, also ran a cheese cooperative, and he valued education and really pushed education for both of his children. Calvin has a younger sister, Abby, who died at age 12 of appendicitis, and she had already passed the teacher exam to start teaching in the one-room schoolhouse in their little village. But Calvin was sent to a neighboring town for a high school, and so he boarded with a family about 20 miles away and was sent off to high school. And it's there he met a teacher who told him about, you should really take a college entrance test. You'd be really great at this. And his father really pushed and encouraged it. He didn't want him to take over the family farm. He was gonna go into some sort of business. And we have, Calvin learns of the college entrance exams, and then he does a year at St. Johnsbury Academy to prep for that as well after high school. And so it's there that he meets a teacher who says, I think Amherst College was the best choice for you. They came to visit Amherst, and then he passes the test and enters in the fall of 1892. So we have his freshman year on the left and his senior year on the right at Amherst. So following his Amherst graduation in 1895, he's looking to study law, and he applies to a couple different law firms. He applied to one in Burlington, Vermont, and he hadn't heard back from the person, and so he also applied to a firm in Northampton called Hammond and Field, and they were both Amherst alums as well. And Henry Field was on the Forbes Library Board of Trustees and later became a county court judge, and John Hammond also later became a county court judge. So there's a lot of theories. If Coolidge had not become president, he was on track for a judgeship eventually with those two mentors. So he studies with them, apprentices for about 3 years, studying law and studying Charles Forbes' book collection as well, and takes the bar exam and passes. And so we have him in 1898. He opens up a solo law practice in Northampton. And this is downtown Northampton, about 1899. If you're familiar with it at all, still has that really wide Main Street. And most of these buildings are all still there. And the church steeple, that is still there. So we have, this is his first ad he puts in a city directory in 1900, advertising his own practice. His birth name is actually John Calvin Coolidge. So he's John Calvin Coolidge Jr. officially. He never went by John, he always went by Calvin. His father was John Calvin, and his grandfather was Calvin, and so he was named for him. You'll see his notary signature is J. Calvin Coolidge, but otherwise he never uses that as well. So while he's building up this law practice, he also gets involved in local politics. So Mr. Hammond, Mr. Field introduce him to lots of people in Northampton. They recognize him as a quiet, shy introvert, but very talented at speech and debate, and very brilliant. So they're pushing him, networking him, meeting all kinds of people to get into the local scene. He starts off on his Republican City Ward Committee, meets a lot of people that way. The clerk of the court died in office, and it's Henry Field says, you know, you gotta go run down to the courthouse today because they're gonna appoint somebody in the next couple days. Get in line for that. That'll be great for your law career. So he does that, gets appointed. He ran for a term of his own as well. And so that starts him off really learning the behind the scenes of the court for his law career. And so around town, he gets quickly known around businesses in the community, in his own ward. He becomes a city solicitor as well. And so he is hired and appointed to that and starts running for more offices. In the meantime, in 1904, he meets Grace Goodhue, his future wife. And so she is from Burlington, Vermont. She is a city girl. She never intended to ever live or visit a farm until she met him. And she went to the University of Vermont for teaching. And she moved down to Northampton to teach at the Clark School for the Deaf. And so it's there on the Clark property that they meet. And her mother is very reluctant to let her leave Burlington. She's the only child. And she visits the school with her mother, learns about it. So her childhood best friend that was a year ahead of her at UVM had already come down to teach there. So they come to visit Miss Ivagale and really look at the school. And they convinced her mother to let her move down there. You know, Northampton was a women's town, had a women's college. She would be fine, she'd teach a few years. Her mother could still pick out a husband for her in Burlington. And she said, okay. So she lives in a dorm, and in the dorm on the other side of the flower garden and courtyard is young Calvin as a lawyer, renting an attic room from a friend who was a Clark employee. And he watches the pretty girl in the rose garden. She watches this guy, who is this, staring at me all the time. Too shy to talk to me. And they have friends introduce them at a dinner party in 1904, and they are married in 1905. She says in her autobiography that one of their very first dates that was to a political rally, and she thought, why is he taking me here? And unbeknownst to her, he then gets up on stage and delivers a speech. And so his delivery of that and brilliance won her over. And that's how he got out of his little shy introverted shell and won her over, was his ability to deliver a speech. He'd won a lot of speech and debate awards in college, and that set him on that track as well. So they are married in the fall of 1905 in her family home in Burlington. And In his autobiography, he says, quote, "A man who has the companionship of a lovely and gracious woman enjoys the supreme blessing that life can give, and no citizen of the United States knows the truth of this statement more than I. We were made for each other. She has borne with my infirmities, and I have rejoiced in her graces." So Calvin would start off after his city council stint in Northampton, and there's a timeline handout in the back, so you don't have to remember any of this. He would become a state representative, and they were one-year terms, so he does 2 of those terms. And their first child's born in 1906, and then another in the fall, and another child in the spring of 1908. So he does not run again. He returns home to Northampton, to his young family, and he becomes mayor of Northampton for 1910 and 1911, and returns to local politics. At that point, state representative, he's in Boston about 4 or 5 months a year, and so he's still active law practice in Northampton in between as well. And then after the mayor, we have state senator, and the state senator is not going to run for re-election, and it is Mr. Field and Mr. Hammond who say, "Hey, we will back you for this. You need to go back to Boston." And we have, he leaves behind, 2 toddlers now, and he's living in Boston during the week, coming home on the weekends 6 months a year as a state senator. And he becomes president of the state senate, unanimously elected state senate president from Western Mass. First time, it was a huge deal at that point to get somebody from outside of the Boston circle into that position. And that sets him on the track for becoming lieutenant governor. And his stint as lieutenant governor for 2 years, the governor is going to retire. He won't run again, and encourages him to run for governor. So we have here one of his governor campaign material. So his platform there, it was "a square deal to all" was his tagline for that, for governor. He does 2 one-year terms as governor. And this is probably one of my favorite family photos of them. And if you've ever seen photos of Calvin Coolidge, he's rarely smiling. He's that personality where he doesn't want to be caught off guard, and we still kind of have the Victorian era sentiments of not showing a lot of teeth and not a big smiley grin. So it's pretty rare that we see that. And so we see this family photo. And this is on the steps of their home in Northampton. It's 21 Massasoit Street. If you've ever get to Northampton, take a ride by. The house is still there. It's privately owned, but much of the exterior is still the same. And this is taken July of 1920 on what they called Notification Day. So while governor, Calvin Coolidge breaks up a police strike in 1919, which got him on the National Party attention and got him the nomination for the vice presidency. So he's nominated in 1920 for vice president, and the process at that time, they're not at the conventions, the candidates, they're not giving speeches, it's all done by delegates, and he knows his name is being thrown around, but he doesn't think it is serious that he actually could get the nomination. But we have him at the convention, so we have Warren Harding from Ohio and Calvin Coolidge from Massachusetts. And at that point, the big Republican voting blocks are the Northeast and the Midwest. So after over, I think it's 22 ballots cast, they come up with the Harding-Coolidge ticket that won. So what they do at that point is they then have what they call the hometown notification. And so the delegates show up at their house, knock on their door, you're hereby notified of your nomination. Now there's a whole committee behind the scenes that has organized a parade and all the fanfare and decorated the entire downtown in bunting. I'm not sure where they found that much fabric, but we have, our librarian at the time personally took about 200 photos of all these homes and buildings in downtown, all decorated out. It's amazing. photo series. And there's a parade. The newspaper estimates there's 20,000 people in Northampton for this event. And then he gives his acceptance speech on a field of Smith College. And so that takes place there. And the week before had been the hometown notification in Marion, Ohio for Warren Harding. And so this had been a long-standing process to show up in their hometowns and rally the hometown for the election. And then unfortunately, Calvin's father comes down for notification day. So we have him in a lot of photos as well, which I think is really special that, you know, his father swears him in later, also attends his 25 inauguration and is able to see all of this. So we have Calvin Coolidge as vice president in 1920, and then in 1923, August, we have Warren Harding dies while on a trip. He had gone to Alaska, so he's the first sitting president to visit Alaska, is Harding. There's your Jeopardy trivia. And he is ill before he left on the trip. He becomes more ill on the trip, and they cut out a campaign speech in Seattle, and they go right to San Francisco, and he dies in San Francisco. At that point, Calvin Coolidge is vacationing in Vermont at his father's farm. Is a planned vacation as well. And he's getting telegram updates of Harding's health, and you know, he's improving, he's doing well, and he's just carrying on, you know, with farm chores. And there's the fatal telegram arrives. When you think of what Plymouth Notch, Vermont is like in 1923, there's no telephones. They're very, very remote village. And at that point, it is actually at the telegraph station down in Bellows Falls where they receive the news. And the telegraph station calls the phone company owner and says, "Where's the nearest phone to the house?" And the telegraph owner and the phone company owner actually were the ones who drive out in the middle of the night to the house. So they're actually officially the first ones in Vermont that knew the news. So they knock on the door of the house at 2 o'clock in the morning and notify him of the telegram and the news. And his father wakes him up, everybody gets dressed, and there are actually no photographs of this swearing in. So this is a painting recreated of that, and we have this in the museum in our collection. There's also another painting that was done that's up in Vermont that's very similar to this one as well. There had been a reporter there that had been following around Porter Dale, who was running for Congress. So that's the only reporter there, and then Secret Service and a chauffeur. So very few people in the room at the time to witness this. We have lots of firsthand accounts from those people that they wrote up later, detailing the events of the night, but it's 2:47 a.m. His father swears him in the family living room with the family Bible. And so very special for that to happen. We have later his father, people say, well, how did you swear him in? How did you know you could? And he was a notary, and he said, well, no one told me I couldn't. You know, there's this sense of urgency. We have to swear him in right away, but he's not the first accidental president through death, but we still don't have the protocol of what to do. So when Harding had been ill that week before, there was chatter of needing to swear him in quickly if something were to happen and get a hold of him. So he is sworn in again by a federal judge in a very secret ceremony, again with no photos. We only know that judge's account. But a federal judge, Howling in Washington, swears him in a couple weeks later when people are questioning the father's authority because he's a notary by commissioned by the state of Vermont, and it's not federal. So there is a second little ceremony later. So again, he's one of few presidents who had a swearing in twice as well. So. And so you can see the room in Vermont where this all took place as well, and they recreate it every August 3rd as well. And on the centennial in 23, they actually did recreate it at 2:47 a.m. and 2:47 p.m. So they did do an official middle of the night one as well. So, I did not go to that one, I went to the 2 p.m. But I did find, we had one of our summer interns that year, he drove up, slept in his car, and went to the 2 a.m. one, took a bunch of pictures and stuff, and then was camping out in his car. So he was thrilled to witness that occasion. So fun things there. So at the time of the swearing in, Calvin and Grace are up in Vermont, but their kids are not with them. So they're teenagers at this point. One of them is at an Army training camp at Camp Devens in Massachusetts. So it was like a junior ROTC program he was in. And then the younger son was working on a farm in Hatfield, picking tobacco and onions. And so he was at work. And so we have Secret Service are dispatched to go find the kids, pick them up, and get them to Washington. And they are put on trains from Vermont as well, so the kids are not even with them at that point. And it's actually, Calvin sends them to the wrong farm. So there's quite a story of, it was his second summer farming, doing farm work, and he had switched farms because one was paying better, and he thought onions was a little bit easier than tobacco, so he'd switched farms, and Secret Service shows up at the tobacco farm, and they're like, yeah, he's not here. So it's the Belden farm in Hatfield that young Calvin Jr. was working on. And reporters say, well, your father's the president, what are you doing working here? And his response to that is, well, if your father was my father, you would be too. And my father loves that quote, so. So when Coolidge takes over the presidency from Harding, we have about a year and a half left of Harding's term. There's no vice president, there's no way to appoint a vice president, so we also have sort of a weird time there as well. You have a lot of cabinet members who step up to a lot of vice presidential duties. If there were to be a tie-breaking vote for Senate, the president could step in and do that because there is no vice president. So we don't have a process at that point as well. And you also see a lot of cabinet wives taking on duties that the second lady normally would have done. So we see this a lot in our photo collection of like, who are these people at these events? And we're trying to identify them. And it's like, how did they get to go dedicate this thing and be at this ceremony? And it's definitely that period of we don't have those jobs filled. We had a chain of succession if something were to happen to Calvin, similar to today, but we don't have appointment levels at that point. So for 1924, he does run for his own term, and we have the children at that point are attending Mercersburg Academy in Pennsylvania, and so they actually aren't living in the White House, but they're there in the summertime. And so they witness the nomination and the acceptance of the nomination for the 24 campaign, and it's the younger son, Calvin, dies July 7th, 1924. He's age 16, and he dies of blood poisoning. He was playing tennis on the White House lawns, got a blister on his foot, and became infected. We don't have penicillins yet, and he dies of septicemia that summer. It's just the start of the campaign, a lot of historian what-ifs. If the timing was different, would he have even run again? So to start the campaign season off, we have President Coolidge basically just scraps the entire itinerary of the campaign trail. He does very little campaigning. He does a lot of sort of whistle stop, train stop kind of speeches. He does a few big ones, but he does not get outside of Washington much other than one trip to Vermont and Massachusetts, but it's a very quiet campaign for him. What they do instead, and this lovely truck in this photo, they called this the Coolidge Caravan. And so that is his father standing next to it. And his father sets out from Vermont in what they called this Coolidge Caravan. Coolidge and Dawes campaign, so Dawes was the vice presidential nominee, and he's from Illinois. And they're going to drive this caravan and basically a moving billboard from Vermont to Illinois. So he sets out on that trail, and then Dawes covers the whole Midwest in the campaign trail. So we really covered New England and the Northeast in that. There's a couple of books that have been written on this of the Coolidge Caravan and the Lincoln Highway, which are fabulous if you ever want to know more about that. And we have this becomes in 24, and I don't think I have the audio to play a clip of this, but you can find it online as well. We start with technology in the 20s. It's like an explosion of technology in the 20s after World War I for radio, for film, and early audio recordings. And so Coolidge becomes the first president to give a campaign speech with audio and video. It's done on the White House lawn in August of 24. And so this really starts off kind of the mass media of presidential campaigns and political campaigns in general. And really we've had ones use some audio before to publish recordings, but he really becomes the first to embrace the radio. We think of FDR as the radio president with fireside chats, but Coolidge actually gives more broadcasts than FDR. They're shorter. Technology is still newer for him, and Coolidge is a quiet introvert. He's very efficient with his words and his time, and his broadcasts are about 3 to 5 minutes, where FDR got 20, 30, 40-minute broadcasts. But we start off, Harding had done a couple of broadcasts around the DC area and on Navy radio, but it is Coolidge that starts broadcasting on national airwaves from the Oval Office and the White House. And at this time, Coolidge also signs in the act that becomes the modern day FCC. So that starts in 24 as well. The big collection, we don't have too much in Northampton on his audio and video collection. The biggest collection today is a news film library at University of South Carolina, and they have there what was the NBC newsreels. So if you went to a movie theater and saw the newsreels, those are all part of the NBC broadcast archives at University of South Carolina. They've digitized a lot of the Coolidge era. So there is a lot there that we have used. We have a little orientation video that we used a bunch from that collection as well. So it's fun to be able to watch and hear him as well. And you can hear he's anything but silent cow. He also gives more press conferences per number of days in office than any other president ever. So he holds the record. So Silent Cal holds the record for press conferences. We have Eisenhower switches to like a press secretary model that we kind of know of today, where prior to that, the presidents were doing it themselves. So anywhere from 3 to 5 times a week, he is out giving, talking with the press. His format for those, he calls them off the record. He wants the newspaper to just print the White House says. And they weren't allowed to say the president said. So it was the White House says. So if you ever see that in an old news clipping, that typically would come from that. We have transcripts of all these conferences. We've digitized those. Those are online for research. And it's amazing what we can find in those as well. For him, his style was the press would come and they'd write questions on cards, turn those into a staff person. He'd look at all the questions kind of in a back room so he could prepare a little bit of how he would answer them and not kind of be caught off guard in the moment. and he would take a bunch of questions. Other times we see the format of he has something prepared, delivered, and there's no questions allowed. If he's traveling or something else, the staff might just hand out a prepared statement. But it's very rare we see like a give and take rebuttal allowed, but every once in a while you start reading the transcript and he says, oh, you know, Mr. So-and-so, did that answer your question? And we're like, who is this? You know, and it's a reporter. And so we know that's a submitted question that maybe he didn't know what they wanted for an answer. And so you would only be allowed to ask a question if he would call on you directly. So that kind of format's a little different than what we know today, but certainly his interaction with the press is quite significant and a big sort of turning point for the office of presidency. And we have, you know, we can now listen to the president in our living rooms. So in the center here is John Coolidge, his father. This is the living room in Vermont, and he's gathered around with his neighbors, and they are listening to the address accepting the Republican presidential nomination. And so that's broadcast on the air. It's also that 1925 inauguration speech is the first inauguration speech delivered on national airwaves as well. They do a few test runs ahead of time with speeches, and they invited RCA and NBC invited people to send postcards, and they wanted to know where you were listening from, what device you were listening on, who was listening with you, and send all these postcards in. And we have them, there is over 5,000 of these in like 3 giant volumes of scrapbooks, and they are amazing to read of, you know, people sitting gathered around with family and friends, and it's the first time they're hearing a president speak. This is a photo of that 25 inauguration at the podium. And the 25 inauguration, we also have our Chief Justice is Taft. And so we have a former president swearing in a president. Taft would also later swear in Hoover in 29. And so those were the two that Taft was able to swear in that role. Taft was on the Supreme Court for 23, but he was out of town, so he didn't get to do the second secret federal swearing in for Coolidge, but we have him here in this ceremony. So what is the Coolidge presidency like for the 20s here? I think we research often, people come to us with the Roaring 20s, and we like to dispel the myth of the Roaring 20s. So it roared a lot for people in cities and businesses, and the wealthy got wealthier. But after World War I, and farmers were in a very deep, dark agricultural depression that sets in 1919. We also have about 20% inflation in 1919 as we start off this decade, and significant war debt to pay off as well. So Coolidge inherits this economy. Harding has started to work a little bit on the war debt, but really Coolidge makes it his mission to pay off the war debt during his administration. We see a lot with Calvin Coolidge's attitudes about debt. From childhood, his father is a county tax collector. His father is having to repossess properties. Repossess farms from neighbors. He's sending people to debtors' prisons to work on farms, and that starts off sort of this long ingrained attitude of never having a mortgage. So the Coolidge family lives in a rented duplex in Northampton until after the White House they purchased a home with cash. But he never had a mortgage, partly because He didn't want to lose his home. Also, he thought his jobs were all tied to elections he could lose and be unemployed. And so we see a little bit of him somewhat out of touch with the average amount of debt an American was in at that point. We have consumer credit. We have explosion of consumer goods. Refrigerators, take me home for 50 cents and pay on credit. So if you ever look at advertising in the 20s, and these new things called credit cards are out there as well. So we do have a big decade of consumer culture in that post-war period. We also have automobiles, transportation, and big changes in jobs and the job market of where people could work. You didn't have to walk to work anymore. You could take a trolley, a train, or drive. And so it opened up new places where people could work. And you also had in the war years, more jobs open to women. And they did not want to vacate those jobs after the war. So we have a huge shift in gender roles and jobs throughout the 20s as well. You see, for example, telephone operators were always men until World War I. Became a woman's job permanently. So we have a big shift there. And in the 1920 census, if you've ever done genealogy and looked at census records, 1920 gets the shift from farms to cities. And so for the first time ever, nationally, we have more people not living on a farm than living on a farm. And so we see that shift. And the war brought in a shift of agribusiness, and we start seeing corporate farming and really specialized farming as opposed to general family farms. And that is a big change of the war as well. We do see Coolidge pay off the war debt in full throughout his time. He balances a budget, trims the budget significantly to balance it and use a surplus paying off war debt. Americans had bought millions in Liberty bonds to help finance the war, and he also had the goal of being able to pay back the bonds on time or early, and he did achieve that as well. We see a lot of researchers, especially economists coming into research and, where's the blame for the Great Depression? And they all look at his really high rate of paying off debt and how do you balance paying off debt and growing the economy as well. And so that is also part of his legacy of, could we have done this differently? What did we learn at that point? Did we know a Great Depression was coming? Did we know another war was coming? And so I think when we look back on that as well, a lot of people reflect on he could have been less aggressive and more growth as well. When we look at women's rights and voting for 1920s, we have Grace Coolidge is voting in 1920 for the first time ever in a federal election, and her husband is on the ballot for the vice presidency. This is her voting in the picture on the left. She's casting a ballot in 1920 in Northampton, and the one on the right at the little desk is on the lawn of the White House in 1924. They didn't come home for the election, they did mail-in voting back to Northampton. So mail-in voting is not a new concept. We have a lot of pictures of mail-in voting in the 20s from them as well. They weren't always back home in Northampton to cast those ballots as well. And so we have in the 24 campaign, in his acceptance speech, Coolidge says, quote, "For the first time after having the opportunity fully to organize, the women of the nation are bringing the new force which they represent directly to bear on our political affairs. I know that the influence of womanhood will guard the home, which is the citadel of the nation. I know it will be a protector of childhood. I know it will be on the side of humanity. I welcome it as a great instrument of mercy and a mighty agency of peace. I want every woman to vote." We see Mrs. Coolidge as a huge promoter of voting registration throughout Washington, throughout Northampton, for the rest of her life. She's very involved in campaigns to register people to vote as well. And we also see Coolidge, when he's in the state senate early on, Massachusetts was looking to pass suffrage at the state level. So it came up for a vote in 1910 and 1913. It failed both times. And when we think of the zigzag flip-flop of the parties, is the Republican Party voting for it and the Democratic Party voting against it. So how things have changed in 100 years here, I can't really compare the parties to each other. But for him as Senate President and Republican leader in Massachusetts, was pushing women's suffrage and women voting. There was lots of towns throughout Massachusetts that were passing it at the town level as well. Northampton tried to pass it for school committee, and it failed. And so we see Coolidge really promoting that as well. So a few other sort of big changes that come in. We have, again, like I said, with the paying off the debt, we also have a lot of tax cuts. And so Coolidge, we've often seen it misquoted of, you know, how much you lower taxes, and they forget the sentence before how much Wilson and Harding raised it for the war, to pay for the war. And so Coolidge is bringing it down to pre-war levels. Excuse me. So he's bringing it down to the pre-war levels, and then he's also lowering it even further for the lower incomes. So when you look at what tax return forms looked like in the 20s, and there's a whole, below certain income levels, people don't even have to file. So he's eliminated a lot of that as well. And that was his answer to high inflation as well, and so trying to lower taxes there and reduce the debt in general. For him, we also see in the 20s, post-war, this period of isolationism, and so foreign policy, he gets a lot of criticism for having little, where Wilson gets credit for having a lot of good foreign policy. So if you compare the two of them, they are really opposites in foreign policy. So we have very little, but we do see Coolidge show up to the Pan-American Conference in Cuba, and he's the first sitting president to visit Cuba, and only two have. And so he makes that trip in 1928, and really looking at South America as a trade partner as well, and the outcome of that conference. We have Charles Dawes as vice president, creates the Dawes Plan that he won a Nobel Prize in 1925 for, to aid recovery to Europe, to rebuild the European economy after the war as well, and really talk about reparations. The plan was never fully fulfilled, but it set out to really stabilize the global economy as well. The Kellogg-Briand Pact comes in 1928, and this is a treaty of unification that they really used, that it was a tool to never use war to solve problems. Very ambitious, and we know that did not last long. Kellogg was in Coolidge's cabinet as well, so he is the big sort of peace promoter throughout the administration. And then for Coolidge, we have in 1924, he signed a Immigration Act that Harding had worked on before him. And this becomes the most restrictive immigration act we've ever had. And we're really limiting immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe and completely eliminating immigration from Asia at that point. So this is building on previous things. We have Chinese exclusion with Chester Arthur back in 1873, and they've kept renewing that and building upon that. There was Immigration Act signed by Harding in 21 as an emergency act, and the 24 really renewed that and added more to it. It put in a quota system of how many people could come from various places, and that quota system actually comes from a senator in Vermont. So Senator Dillingham in Vermont is the one who created that quota system. And oddly enough, it's Dillingham in Burlington, Vermont that Coolidge had applied for a job as a law clerk in his office. And he finds his way to the Senate while Coolidge is president. So they meet up again later. And the what ifs Coolidge had ever taken that job show up as well. So those come into play as well. But we have for 24, after World War I, we have a large veteran population from the war. We have a large disabled veteran population to get back into job training as well. And that's where they look to the First Lady, and they look to the Senate wives and the Cabinet wives to take on projects with military hospitals and disabled veterans and help with some training efforts and rehabilitation efforts. So these become pet projects for the First Lady, the Second Lady, and then we also do have the charity work of the Cabinet wives and Senate wives as well. They're doing a lot of rehab efforts, training people. At Walter Reed, Mrs. Coolidge had been a teacher for the deaf, so she is actually doing a lot of work at Walter Reed, teaching people how to speak again. And she's training other nurses and other volunteers with the Red Cross of how to do this work as well. And that becomes a huge project, personal project for her. So we don't see First Lady platforms the way we think of today as well, but when we think of her, that is the big one for her as well. She also brings Helen Keller and Annie Sullivan to the White House twice, and really promoting deaf education and deaf culture as well. And that becomes a platform as well, because again, we have a lot of veterans returning, having lost their hearing in the war as well, and having to retrain them for jobs. And so she takes on that cause as well. The other issue of the 20s we have with civil rights as well. So Coolidge's record on this is a little bit mixed. 1920s time period and what he can pass. We think of Jim Crow laws in this era. We have a lot on our website of primary sources and teacher resources on this as well. So if it's something you're interested or know any teachers out there, we're happy to provide some more of those documents. But Coolidge speaks in his, instead of State of the Union, they called it Address to Congress. And in his address to Congress, he's repeatedly pushing for anti-lynching bills. Never happens. And he's really speaking out against lynching as well. He doesn't directly name the Klan in speaking out against it, but we do have a big rise in Klan activity in the 1920s, including visits to Northampton and a few churches in Northampton at that point, directly protesting for him as well, and this Dyer Act and anti-lynching bills. But we do see Coolidge's big stance, I think, comes out for African Americans in 1924. He receives a letter protesting the Republican Party's nomination of a black dentist in Harlem named Dr. Charles Roberts, who was running for a congressional seat. And he's receiving lots of letters that he needs to not allow this to happen. This man can't run. And Coolidge, instead of responding to the letters, he put something out to the press. And he wanted it printed in every city, in every newspaper, about Dr. Roberts' right to run for office. And he says, quote, "He is precisely as much entitled to submit his candidacy in a party primary as in any other citizen. The decision must be by the constituents to whom he offers himself and by nobody else." Then he goes on to say, "Our Constitution guarantees equal rights to all citizens without discrimination on account of race or color. and I've taken my oath to support that Constitution as the source of your rights and my rights. I propose to regard it and administer it as the source of the rights and all the people, whatever their belief or race. And so this is his response that was printed, headlines all across the country. He got a lot of hate mail from that article, and he got a lot of fan mail from that article. So, he later signs federal legislation that gave federal dollars to a new black medical college at Howard University. And that did receive widespread praise, but for many different reasons. His intention was just, we need more doctors. We need to train more people. And a lot of response was, great, now we have more segregation. So the praise was very mixed, and the reaction to what the praise actually meant behind the scenes. But we do have Wilson had segregated civil service jobs and actually segregated bathrooms in the Capitol building, again, under Wilson, and so Harding and Coolidge are undoing a lot of that damage as well. And we have African Americans taking civil service tests and becoming federal employees, again, under Coolidge. And I think the one that Coolidge is probably most proud of in this area too is in 1924 he signs the Indian Citizenship Act, which gave Native Americans on reservations full citizenship and created what became known as like a dual citizenship process to keep tribal affiliation and US citizenship. And the legacy of this, you know, it's a little bit of paternalistic attitudes from him, but it really backs off on all of the assimilation attitudes we have beforehand. So he really wants to kind of turn the tides of government and Native relations and really open up a dialogue. He invites lots of leaders to the White House during this time as well. And he's the first sitting president to visit reservations. So summer 1927, he spends in Black Hills, South Dakota, and there's a summer White House in a different, he puts it in a different location every summer. Prior to him, a lot of people just went home to their house if it was outside of the swampy, mosquito-infested Washington, D.C. But in 27, his is the first west of the Mississippi in that summer out in Black Hills. And he visits reservations in North and South Dakota, Idaho, and Wyoming as well. But it's there he receives a native headdress, which is in our collection in the Coolidge Museum, along with 35 other pieces gifted to him, including 7 peace pipes smoked with leaders along that trip as well. And so he's really seen as the sort of good faith forward efforts and really listening to that as well. And then he does a big push of federal money to bring electricity and telephones to rural America, including reservations. So it's under him we start seeing electricity being put into reservations as well. And there is, we did a big panel program on the 100th anniversary of this in 2024, which is up on our website, and 3 of our 4 panelists in that all had Native ancestry or current tribal affiliation. So it's a great program if you want to check that out on our YouTube as well. And so, we're good on time here. And so this, we get to, you know, right now we're talking so much about the 250th birthday, but what was this 150th birthday? And so this photo from Library of Congress, so this is in Philadelphia, so the sesquicentennial International Exposition in Philadelphia ran from June to December 1926 in honor of the 150th. And at that point, so they recreate the Liberty Bell. They have the original Liberty Bell on display within the expo. But in order to even get to that, You have to drive or walk under this bell. This is an 80-foot bell. This is 80-foot bell, 30-foot columns beside it, recreated, and they had this up for about a year in Philadelphia. And then electric lights are brand new. We start seeing electric lights on the White House Christmas tree, under Coolidge as well, but this had 26,000 electric lights on this. So light up the whole expo for the evening time. And Coolidge's big celebration for the 150th, he's in Philadelphia. This comes from the Philadelphia Inquirer headlines. And Coolidge's birthday is July 4th. So he was actually in Northampton on July 4th that year as a celebration, and then he's put on a train that night to Philadelphia to show up July 5th at the Expo Center for their big celebration. They had 200,000 people for his speech in the rain. So I can't imagine the crowds if it was better weather too. And so he delivers a speech in honor of the 150th as well. And one part of that, he says, amid the clash of conflicting interests, amid all the welter of partisan politics, every American can turn for solace and consolation to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, with the assurance and confidence that those two great charters of freedom and justice remain firm and unshaken. And he goes on to really talk about the Declaration of Independence in that speech as well. And we have that up on our website. We have a whole little links of 150th things. Northampton did a tiny little 150th parade and celebration as well. And he does appear at that on July 2nd when he's back in Northampton. But sort of the big national celebration was this almost 7 months Expo Center as well. And I'd be remiss if I did not leave you with my two favorite portraits of them. And these are in the Coolidge Museum. They're kind of our showpiece as well. These two portraits that were done, these are Howard Chandler Christie is the artist. He was famous portrait painter, and then in the 30s and 40s, he was known as the Christie Girls, who riled the Gibson Girls in magazine advertising. He also did a lot of World War I propaganda posters. It's kind of how he got his start, and we have a couple of those are fun as well. But these, he was commissioned by Mrs. Coolidge's University of Vermont female fraternity, commissioned Christie to do 2 sets of portraits of the couple, and one was to be gifted to the couple, and one was to be gifted to the White House. So this set that ended up with the Coolidges, this hung in the White House from 24 to 29. They took them with them, and they brought them, they were sent directly to Forbes Library. So they have hung there since 1929, and the wall they have been on for almost 100 years was built out because they needed a wall big enough to hang them on. These are enormous, and Christie designed them to sit side by side and face each other. So we can't split them up as well. Although our facilities manager is always cursing Christie for not making the frames the exact same size, because Mrs. Coolidge's frame is much more elegant and ornate than the president's. But they do hang there as well. And Christie only completed a second portrait of Grace Coolidge. He never completed a second one of Calvin Coolidge. He'd been there for about 6 weeks at the White House. They were posing for him. The president says, "I'm too busy for this. Like, you sketched me enough. You've done enough." But the second portrait of Mrs. Coolidge is a full-length portrait with the White House in the background. She's in a red dress with her white collie dog, and it hangs in the China room of the White House. And it's that portrait that Jackie Kennedy redecorates that room in red around that portrait. And it's still hanging in that room. It's gorgeous if you ever go on a White House tour to be able to see it in person. It is amazing. And it's it's like 10 feet tall, so beautiful portrait. But these, we are very special that we have these in Northampton and brought back, and that they did not stay in the family. We are in the midst of renovation plans for the Coolidge Museum. We hired a designer a year ago, and we are busy fundraising and applying for grants. We submitted a federal grant today, a city grant last week, and so we spent our winter writing grants for this project. But initially, when our committee got together like 2 years ago and put out the sort of RFP for a designer, the one piece we said had to be included in the design was these portraits, and they had to hang side by side like this. And so we actually, one of the reasons we chose the Amherst firm we did was actually because they had the best design for this as well. I actually have design plans with me. If anybody wants to see them, they're also up on our website. But they're really fun to modernize our space that had its last renovation in 1956, thanks to a state earmark that Grace Coolidge got us. But we will retire our 1955 display cases, hopefully at the end of the year or early next year. So it's really exciting to embark on that with lots of new research. We've had wonderful scholars and interns and myself doing a lot of research of our own collections as well. But just as we've been writing new labels and new panels, has been a lot of fun as well. So I'll leave you with his campaign logo, which was for '24 was Keep Coolidge. And we also see it as Keep Cool and Keep Coolidge. So fun little things. I have on the back table for you, we have some timeline handouts. There's a little fun fact sheet that one of our volunteers created for a program. And then I have some stickers. Grace Coolidge had a pet raccoon in the White House, sent for Thanksgiving dinner, and then they kept it as a pet. So that photo is on a sticker back there as well. There's some bookmarks and postcards. So help yourself, take as many as you want, and share those away. And then, I don't know if we have time for questions? Absolutely. Okay, so we have questions. Happy to take questions anytime. Oh, and there's also a little rat card back there that has my phone number and email on it too, so if you're looking for that.
I've got a question for
Yes.
you. First of all, I want to thank you for the wonderful presentation on the life of Calvin Coolidge, and what life was like in the early 20s, which many of our parents and family were born that we never knew. But I'm extremely inquisitive. Now, he was known as Silent Cal. What were the attributes of his personality to magnify his presence to become President of the United States from the beginning?
Yeah, so the question of his nickname is Silent Cal, what are the attributes that lift him up to the presidency? And I actually have a great hour-long talk that I called The Road to the White House that I have given a few times. And that's sort of fun to see his rise up there as well, but I think we look back at, he's at the right place in the right time. He got hired by the right people that really mentored him in his early days and really kind of pushed him to get out of his shell and that sort of introverted shell. I think his move to Amherst and Northampton and not staying in the farm really got him in there. When you think of Northampton today is 30,000 people, but in 1900, when he's there, it's 20,000 people. It's still a big city, it's the county seat, so to be a lawyer was the right place to be. There were more lawyers there then than there are today. And so I think he fell into the right people that sort of helped push that early career. In Boston politics, he befriends Frank Stearns, who owned a department store, and really sort of pushed his and helped his elections and campaigns. And Stearns introduces him to a man, Bruce Barton, who was a marketing genius. And he had a PR and marketing firm. And it's really Barton that also does a lot with him for the 1920 campaign, the 24 campaign, and then also like, hey, you know, this is how you need to do campaign stops. This is how you need to interact with people. And you need to upgrade your wardrobe a little bit. You're frugal and cheap, but you need to spend a little more money on your clothes and suits, and you know, to compete. And so I think it's finding those right people that really pushed him. But he is that introvert. You know, he gets told, or it's reported, he naps every day. You know, and he starts that from when he's a young lawyer, even as president. Well, he's not really napping to sleep, but he's napping to recharge. And so he has these periods in his schedule that are labeled nap, which basically is like the clue to his staff and secretary of like, I need a break. You know, and I think that's really how he scheduled his time for that personality to just keep going and be on stage all the time. And as a librarian, I certainly understand that, you know. We're in the public all day, so. But also he marries an extrovert. He marries this bubbly extrovert, and when you look at their children, John is the introvert, Calvin Jr. is the extrovert. And so you really see that. You see her in a dinner party setting. She's the one, you know, pushing him too as well, and carrying on the conversations behind the scenes too. So, we got one.
Did he decide not to run in 28, or what was the
Oh, so question, did he decide not to run in 28? And it's probably in my notes, but I forgot to say that. So in 28, he could have run again. We don't have term limits. And even by today's term limits, he's still under the 10-year mark from the end of Harding's term. And so he can run again. And when that's determined, he decided in the summer of 27 he wouldn't run again. And he puts out to the press, and the press kind of freaked out because he'd never done this before, but he hands a handwritten slip, it's handwritten piece of paper, he wrote out 25 times, told his secretary to hand it out, and it said, I do not choose to run in 1928. That's it, no questions allowed, nothing, the president's not stepping foot on the porch, and the staff is just handing this out, and said, publish this. And he wouldn't answer to it. He does later say, when he's questioned, what's next? Retirement, retirement, retirement. He's been in public service for over 30 years. And then, you know, he's not looking for a new job. He has no job in mind. At that point, he made $75,000 as president, and he was making about 8 to 10 as a lawyer. So it was a lot of money for them. He didn't need to go hunt down a new job. He's a super frugal guy anyway. And then we do know later, he does answer to the timing for his announcement, because several offices he'd run for, because there was a retirement, because there was no incumbent. So we wanted people to know that the office would be open. He also wanted to give the National Party plenty of time to find a new candidate. And he repeatedly says, if you nominate me, I will not accept it. We also know later that summer, Mrs. Coolidge's health had not been well, and they were hiding that from the press. She had kidney stones, kidney infections repeatedly. Nothing very serious, but I think it just, that and, you know, the prior death of their son just really took a toll on both of them, that he was like, we're done. And when they asked Mrs. Coolidge, did you know about this? And she said, well, I didn't know until he announced it that he decided, you know, that was his final decision. And so he had talked about it, but I think whatever occurred that week, he's just like, nope, yeah, we're out. But campaigns at that point were only like 6 months ahead. They weren't years ahead like we think today. So for him to do that in August 27, about November 28, took people by surprise. That was a huge time ahead. So, but he never really gives a very specific answer, even in his autobiography. It's very great, very factual, but he really doesn't cover that. He just says, and I quietly retired to Northampton. So, anything else? We got in the back. Oh, yes. Yep, so the comment is he's quite the animal lover. Yes, so they have quite a little menagerie at the White House. Many dogs, many cats, birds. There are bears, lions that were sent as gifts to the president. Those go to the Rock Creek Zoo, which is now the National Zoo, and a hippo, so those don't stay in the White House. But there is the famous raccoon, Rebecca the raccoon, and she is sent for Thanksgiving dinner from a farm in Alabama. It's actually an African-American woman that raised them and ran that farm and gifted this raccoon for Thanksgiving dinner. And she was just tame and mild, and they kept her as a pet. Put her on a leash with the cats. The cats were also on leashes because they tended to run away. So they would be out walked with the cats and the dogs. And Rebecca ran around the White House. She did not return to Northampton. She went to Rock Creek Zoo after March of '29, but she became quite the famous pet. Lots of photographs of her. They had 2 white collies as well. They had a Boston Terrier. They had a canine police dog that failed its training school and became a pet in the residence of the White House instead of Secret Service dog. And in retirement, they had 2 identical brown chows in Northampton that were at their house, which are really fun. We say they play hide and seek in black and white photography, these dark brown dogs, so they're always fun when we can spot them hidden away in a picture or two. So, but yeah, quite the animal lover of the White House. In the hat.
Thank you. On the picture of the inauguration
Mhm.
earlier, there's the great press of the United States, but in the top there's that sort of badge with a letter. Do you know the symbolism of that letter?
Oh, on the top of there. Yeah, it's part of the seal there. So and the seal is different. When you look at the actual full presidential seal, it's changed later by after World War II. So for his time, the eagle faces to the right like that. Now it goes left, but the E is E pluribus unum as part of the logo. So this would be like their ceremonial logo, and then they had the one with the arrows and the wreath. And at that point, the eagle faced the arrows, and then after World War II, when they change it, the eagle faces the laurel. So, you know, I didn't know that when I first started working there 22 years ago, and I was like, is this printed backwards? And, you know, then somebody clued me in on that of like, no, it's not a backwards photo, we've changed the logo. So it's kind of fun to look at that. This one particularly has the date on the bottom, so we know it's not backwards, and it's also got the E at the top as well. So, and then you do see those NBC microphones at the top, so that's fun to zoom in on the old microphones. So, we had
Quick question. In your archives at all, do you see a picture of the entourage from Washington, D.C. making their way up through the notch in old Model T cars and coming up to swear him in? I think I saw that at the Plymouth Notch.
Oh, to swear him in 23 or in later?
When Harding dies and when they have to do it quick.
Yeah, so there is some people who are already there on a press tour with Senator Dale, but then there is the caravan that leaves, and so that leaves Plymouth and goes back to Washington. And so they take Coolidge to a train station in Bellows Falls, Vermont, about 20 miles away. And then, but then there is the caravan of cars that leaves Plymouth and drives to Washington. So there was some staff, some Secret Service. There's also a couple, the vice presidential car, which becomes the presidential limo, that gets put on a train. But there are several cars that drive back to Washington. Yeah, and then there is, the summer of '24 is the summer White House. in Plymouth Notch. So after his son had died, they originally were supposed to be up there longer and then on the campaign trail and end the campaign trail in Vermont at the end of the summer. And that gets cut short, but they spend 3 weeks in August with the Summer White House up above the father's general store, with their office, all the mail, phone, brand new phone lines are there. And so there's quite an entourage of cars from Washington that come up that summer as well. So, and that becomes quite the tourist destination after that, of people want to see it. There's another family friend that opens a little tea house. There's little Secret Service cabins that get built. If you know anybody ever looking for a summer internship, a college student, you can live in those little cabins in the summer. They are very rustic, but they do have a composting toilet and Wi-Fi. So that's their lure, but they are these cute little Secret Service era, 20s era cabins that are still there. So if you ever go, take a look at that as well. But then what they would use in the summer for additional security, everywhere they went, they would contract with the state militia and have state guards. So they'd have a whole line of tents and an encampment on the perimeter of the property that was all state guards. So, can you imagine your state guard duty in the summer is assigned to a president? I mean, it's kind of amazing. Think about that, but that's what they would use for additional security measures at each place they went.
Well, seeing no more questions in the
Oh, we had one more in the front.
One more.
We had one more in the front.
Sorry. I was just wondering if you knew what Coolidge's position was on suffrage when he was a state official, since Massachusetts was kind of,
Yeah.
dragging their feet on suffrage. Was he out in the open for it, or was he quiet about it?
Yeah, so her question, what is his stance on suffrage as a state official and earlier? And so as state senator, we do know that he's out pushing suffrage at the state level. So there's a vote of 1910, 1913 at the state level that he was very supportive of and pushing that. And then there's also a measure comes up when he's mayor. They're really trying to put on the ballot for women to vote school committee. So they start slow, like we're gonna ask for that first. And that also had failed, but he came out in support of that. So we do see that in his early career.
So just to kind of wrap this up a little bit, I have a couple of comments. I think all of us know that March is Women's History Month. I think this woman owns the history of Calvin Coolidge. Would you not agree? But we do have three more events coming up this month that are not only like hers, speaker, female. It's hard to get women to speak and give lectures. It's much more difficult, but we do have a couple coming up. One is the Scenes from Love or Liberty. It is a performance, a musical performance on the 26th of this month. It's for Love or Liberty. It is revolutionary based. When General Knox came down from Saratoga, brought the 51 cannons across West Springfield, across the Connecticut River, helped by the Springfield militia, and took those cannons on to Boston, which allowed for a real pivotal moment in the history of the Revolution. So I think you should make sure that you sign up for that. We also have Founding Mothers with Kelly Brown. Kelly Brown was Massachusetts Teacher of the Year out of East Hampton, believe it or not. But she is very credentialed, and she's going to talk about the founding mothers. Abigail Adams and Mercy Otis Warren. I think you're going to find that very fascinating and celebratory towards Women's History Month. We also have another professor coming in to talk about women in the military. Now, those are just some of the upcoming lectures this month, and I hope you all sign up for all of them because we're very excited about what we've put together. If you do not have this booklet that we put together celebrating the 50th anniversary of our country and providing programs that are celebratory in that event, please pick one up at the back or at the front at the reception. They're almost always out there. And I want to really thank you for coming. It was a lot of work to put a lot of these programs together. I worked on it since last August on behalf of the Long Meadow Adult Community Center Fund. And because of you, the donors, we have been able to provide, I think, stellar programming on the 250th anniversary of our country. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.